the night Vincent Okafor touched that canvas. The room stopped breathing, not paused. Stopped. 400 people, collectors, curators, senators, hedge fund managers, women whose jewelry cost more than most people's houses. And not one of them made a sound for 11 full seconds. Someone counted. It was reported afterward in the Globe and Mail in a small column on page 7, tucked between an ad for a watch and a story about municipal parking rates. 11 seconds of silence in a room that had not been quiet since 1987, when the Hargrove Foundation first opened its doors on King Street West. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's go back to where it started. The way all things like this start, with a man who thought he owned the room, and another man who actually did. Vincent Okafor was 53 years old and had been mopping the floors of the Hargrove Foundation for 11 months when Aldous Crane first noticed him. And by noticed, that's generous. Aldous Crane noticed the mop. He noticed the wet streaks left on the marble. He noticed that the bucket had a small wheel that squeaked. A sound that Crane found personally offensive, the way some people find the sound of chewing offensive, or the sound of breathing that isn't their own. Crane did not notice the man holding it. That was, in many ways, the whole story. Everything that came after was just the consequence of that one blind spot. Vincent arrived at the foundation at 5:30 every morning, before the security system switched from overnight to daytime mode, before the junior curators came in with their flat whites and their canvas tote bags, before the light changed from the cold blue of the street lamps to the warmer gray of a Toronto autumn. He arrived in a gray uniform that said Prestige Contract Cleaning on the back in a font that had been chosen for its inoffensiveness. He carried a key card that gave him access to the service entrance off Mercer Street. He was never late, not once in 11 months. He cleaned the main gallery first, always the main gallery. He moved between the paintings with a kind of careful reverence that, had anyone been watching, might have seemed odd for a man whose job was to clean the floor beneath them. He did not touch the artwork. He never touched anything he wasn't supposed to touch. But he looked. He looked the way a person looks at something they've loved for a very long time. The other cleaners, Amara, who was 22 and studying nursing at Ryerson, and an older Jamaican man everyone called Duppy, who had been with Prestige for 14 years. Both noticed that Vincent looked at the paintings differently. Amara thought maybe he'd taken an art history class somewhere. Duppy thought nothing of it. Duppy had learned, a long time ago, not to wonder too much about the people he worked with because wondering led to knowing, and knowing sometimes made the work heavier. Vincent never told them anything. He was polite. He brought coffee sometimes. Real coffee, not the drip stuff, but a thermos of something dark and good that he made at home before his shift. He asked about Amara's exams. He listened when Duppy talked about his granddaughter. But about himself, about his life before the gray uniform and the squeaky bucket, Vincent Okafor said almost nothing. There was, on the wall of his apartment on Bathurst Street, a one-bedroom on the 3rd floor of a building that smelled of old radiators and someone else's cooking, a painting. Small, maybe 14 by 18 inches, an oil. Figures in a market, somewhere in Lagos, the light coming in sideways and golden, the shadows underneath the stalls almost purple. It hung on a nail above the radiator, and when the heat clicked on at night, the air that rose made the light on the painting seem to shift, made the figures in the market seem almost to move. That painting had been in a gallery in Paris. In 2003, it had sold for more than Vincent currently made in 2 years. It had sold under a different name, a gallery name, a name that at the time had felt like a new beginning and now felt like something from a life he'd lived so long ago it might have been someone else's. He did not talk about Paris. He did not talk about the painting. He did not talk about the 11 other works currently held in storage at a private facility in Etobicoke, works he had created between 1998 and 2009, works that 3 separate curators, one in London, one in New York, one in Berlin, had described in print as among the most significant figurative paintings produced by any artist of his generation. He mopped the floor. He made good coffee. He asked about Amara's exams. The Hargrove Foundation's annual collector Gala was the social event of the Toronto art season. This is not an exaggeration. This is what the Toronto Life piece said every single year, slightly reworded, with a different photograph of the same 30 people in different outfits. The gala raised money for emerging artists, which was something the foundation was very proud of, and which Aldous Crane, who chaired the foundation's board, mentioned in every speech he gave, usually twice, once near the beginning and once at the end, in case anyone had forgotten. Crane was 61. He had made his money in commercial real estate, the kind of real estate that involves buying buildings other people loved and replacing them with buildings other people needed. He had pivoted to philanthropy in his mid-50s, which is when a certain kind of man discovers that writing checks is more interesting than writing contracts, and that being photographed at gallery openings is more flattering than being photographed at development hearings. He had a wife, Sylvia, who wore her money quietly and her opinions loudly, and who privately thought her husband's interest in art was about 30% genuine and 70% personal branding. She was being charitable. Crane did not know much about art. He knew what things cost. He knew who had bought what and what it was worth now. He knew the names of the right artists the way he knew the names of the right restaurants. Not because he'd studied them, but because they came up often enough in the right rooms that they'd adhered to him, like lint on a good jacket. He did not know Vincent Okafor's name. He had never heard it. Why would he have? The gala was on a Friday in October. The foundation had been prepped for 3 days, extra staff, borrowed furniture from a rental company in Mississauga, flowers flown in from a farm in the Netherlands. The caterers arrived at noon. The lighting technician arrived at 1. By 3 o'clock, the main gallery looked like a different building, the kind of building that made people feel that money and beauty were the same thing, which was more or less the point. Vincent's shift ended at 2. He had cleaned the gallery that morning, the floors, the baseboards, the glass on 3 display cases, the handles on the service doors. He had done it without being asked to do anything extra, without being thanked, without being seen. At 1:45, he changed out of his uniform in the service washroom on the basement level. He folded the gray shirt carefully. He hung his keycard on the hook by the door, and then he did something he had not done in a very long time. He came back, not through the service entrance, through the front door on King Street West, at 7:15 in the evening, in a dark suit he'd owned since 2011. A suit that still fit because Vincent Okafor had the kind of body that doesn't negotiate with time. He had a ticket, a real one. He'd bought it 6 weeks earlier when they went on sale, using money he'd set aside over 3 months. Because the ticket cost $350, and $350 was not a small number on a cleaner's salary. But this particular gala had something that made it worth it. The foundation was showing, for one night only, 4 paintings from the estate of Raymond Holt, a collector who had died the previous spring and whose collection was being distributed among 3 institutions. 2 of the 4 paintings had never been publicly exhibited. One of them Vincent had seen only in photographs. He had wanted to see it in person for almost 20 years. He was not there to be seen, he was there to see. He stood in the line at the entrance with the collectors and the curators and the minor celebrities and the major donors. He gave his ticket to a young woman with a clipboard. She found his name. She did not look up at his face when she checked it off. He went in. For the first 40 minutes, it was fine. He moved through the room with the particular skill of a man who has spent a long time learning how to take up the right amount of space. Not too much, not too little, enough to be present, but not enough to attract attention. He found the Holt paintings in the East Wing. He stood in front of each one for a long time. The one he'd wanted to see was a large oil, almost 2 meters across, depicting the interior of a church in Barbados, the light coming through a high window and falling on an empty pew, the dust in the air made visible by it. It was an extraordinary painting, not flashy, not the kind of thing that announced itself, the kind of thing that asked you to slow down and rewarded you if you did. He stood in front of it for 8 minutes. A couple moved past him. A waiter offered him champagne. He took it but didn't drink it. He was thinking about light. He was thinking about the way the painter had understood that sometimes the most honest thing you can put in a painting is the space where something isn't. He didn't notice Aldous Crane until Crane was already talking. "Excuse me!" The voice came from just behind his left shoulder. Vincent turned. Crane was looking at him with the particular expression of a man who has identified a problem and is prepared to solve it. Not angry yet. Not even quite rude yet. Just that preliminary certainty, the assumption of authority before authority has been established. "Are you with the catering team?" Crane asked. Vincent looked at him for a moment. No, Vincent said. Crane's eyes moved very quickly, the way the eyes of a certain kind of man move when they're doing rapid recalculation. From Vincent's face to his suit to the champagne glass in his hand to the lanyard around his neck that said guest in small embossed letters. The recalculation did not seem to resolve in Vincent's favor. This wing is reserved for board members and major donors, Crane said. General admission is in the main gallery. I have a general admission ticket, Vincent said. There wasn't a sign. There doesn't need to be a sign. That sentence sat in the air between them for a moment. Vincent held Crane's gaze. He had a very still way of doing this. Not confrontational, not deferential, just present. The way you look at something when you're deciding whether it's worth your time. He decided it wasn't. I'll move, he said simply, and turned back toward the main gallery. That might have been the end of it. That should have been the end of it. But Crane had had 3 glasses of Bordeaux by this point, and there were people nearby. A curator named Felicity and her husband, and 2 board members Crane wanted to impress, and something about the exchange had not gone the way Crane's exchanges usually went, and that was a feeling Aldous Crane did not handle with grace. Wait, Crane said. Vincent stopped, did not turn around immediately. How did you get a ticket to this event? I bought one, Vincent said, online, 6 weeks ago. Because, Crane said, and his voice had shifted now into something that tried to sound like concern, but was really just contempt dressed up in better clothes. This is a fundraising event for the arts community. It's not really. He paused, choosing his words in the way a man chooses words when he wants to say something and also wants to be able to deny having said it. Accessible to everyone. Felicity, the curator, made a very small sound. Her husband looked at the floor. Vincent turned around fully then. He looked at Crane. He took one slow breath. I know what this event is, he said quietly. Then you understand, Crane said with the kind of smile that is not a smile. What happened next was not something Crane had anticipated, because he was the kind of man who assumed the conversation was already over when he decided it was. What happened was that the director of the Hargrove Foundation, a woman named Dr. Nanika Adeyemi, who had held that position for 8 years, and before that had been the senior curator at the AJO, and before that had done her doctorate at the Courtauld Institute in London, walked into the East Wing with a glass of sparkling water and stopped when she saw the tableau in front of her. She looked at Crane. She looked at the 2 board members. She looked at Vincent, and then something shifted in her expression. Something that took about 2 seconds and covered a lot of ground. Vincent, she said. The room rearranged itself, not physically, but you could feel it. Dr. Adeyemi, Vincent said. I've been hoping you'd come tonight. She crossed the room and shook his hand. Both hands, the way you shake hands with someone you genuinely respect. I didn't know if you would. I wanted to see the Holt piece, he said. Of course you did. She turned to the painting and then back to him. What do you think? The light in the upper left, Vincent said. He understood something there that I think most people will miss. Adeyemi nodded slowly. Yes, exactly. She turned then, almost as an afterthought, to Crane. Aldous, do you know Vincent Okafor? Crane's expression did something complicated. We haven't been introduced, he said carefully. Vincent was cleaning your floors this morning, Adeyemi said pleasantly. He's been with Prestige for about a year, she paused. Just a beat, just long enough. He was also the subject of a retrospective at the Serpentine Gallery in 2008. His work is in the permanent collection at the National Gallery of Canada. And last spring, the Art Gallery of Ontario acquired 3 of his pieces for an exhibition they're mounting in February. The 2 board members looked at each other. Felicity, the curator, had gone very still in the particular way of someone who has just understood something and wishes they'd understood her. Crane said nothing. His mouth moved slightly, the way a mouth moves when the brain behind it is running very far behind. I should have introduced you properly, Adeyemi continued, her tone unchanged, light and conversational, which somehow made it worse. Vincent, I'm glad you're here. There's someone in the main gallery who's been asking about your work, a collector from Vancouver. Would you mind? Not at all, Vincent said. He set his untouched champagne on a passing tray. He nodded once to Crane, not warmly, not coldly, just an acknowledgement of the fact of him, and followed Adeyemi toward the main gallery. Crane stood in the East Wing for a long moment after they left. The 2 board members found reasons to be somewhere else. Felicity said something quiet to her husband. The Holt painting hung on the wall. The light from the Barbadian church still falling on the empty pew, the dust still visible in it, the space where something wasn't still asking you to slow down. Crane looked at the painting for the first time all evening. He did not, it should be noted, understand what he was looking at. The collector from Vancouver was named Thomas Birch, and he was not the only one. By the time Vincent had been in the main gallery for 20 minutes, there were 7 people around him. Curators, collectors, a young artist who worked in sculpture and had apparently written her MFA thesis partly on Vincent's use of negative space. They were not crowded around him the way people crowd around a celebrity. They were arranged the way people arrange themselves around someone whose presence has gravitational weight. Vincent held a conversation with each of them. He was not performing. He was not reclaiming anything or proving anything. He was just talking about art the way he always talked about it, with the precision of someone who has spent decades thinking about it seriously, and the ease of someone for whom it was never about performance. Thomas Birch asked about the Lagos market painting, the small one, the one above the radiator on Bathurst Street. Vincent said it wasn't for sale. Birch nodded as though he'd expected that answer. He asked instead about the 3 pieces going to the AGO. They talked for 45 minutes. At one point, Adeyemi joined them briefly and then withdrew, the way a good director does when the exhibition is running itself. At some point in the evening, nobody could quite say when, because these things don't have clear moments, they accumulate. The energy in the room had shifted. People had come for the Hargrove Gala. Some of them would leave having encountered something they hadn't anticipated. A man who had been in their building for 11 months, cleaning their floors at 5:30 in the morning, who happened to be one of the more significant painters working in figurative art in the country. Some of them were embarrassed by that. The good ones were. Crane left early, just after 9. Sylvia, his wife, asked him in the car what had happened. "Nothing," he said. "Long night." Sylvia said nothing. She had seen from across the room the moment in the East Wing. She had not been close enough to hear what was said, but she had seen Adeyemi's face when she found them, and she had seen her husband's face afterward, which was the face of a man who had made a miscalculation that he would not be examining too closely, because examining it closely would require him to admit something he was not prepared to admit. She looked out the window at King Street, the city moving past in its usual way, indifferent and continuous. She did not say what she was thinking. In 32 years of marriage to Aldous Crane, she had learned that there were thoughts best kept in the window. 2 weeks later, the Globe and Mail ran a profile of Vincent Okafor. It was not a long piece. In the arts section, above the fold online, the headline said, "From the Hargrove's floors to its walls, the quiet return of Vincent Okafor." There was a photograph of him standing in his apartment on Bathurst Street, the Lagos market painting visible on the wall behind him, the radiator in the corner, the light coming in from the window at an angle that, the photographer later mentioned to a colleague, seemed to arrive already composed. The piece mentioned the retrospective in London. It mentioned the AGO acquisition. It mentioned, briefly, that Okafor had been working as a contract cleaner for the past year while he rebuilt a studio practice interrupted by circumstances. The piece described as personal and left at that. It did not mention Aldous Crane by name. It did not need to. Vincent was not at the foundation the Monday morning the profile ran. He had given his notice to Prestige the previous Friday, quietly, without drama, the same way he'd done everything. He thanked the supervisor. He returned the key card. He said goodbye to Duppy and asked him to tell Amara he hoped the exams had gone well. He took the streetcar home. He stopped at a hardware store on Bloor and bought 2 new brushes and a tube of cadmium yellow that he'd been putting off getting for 3 weeks because of the cost. He went upstairs to his apartment. He put the kettle on. He looked at the small painting above the radiator, the market in Lagos, the sideways golden light, the figures that seemed almost to move when the heat clicked on. He picked up one of the new brushes. The canvas waiting on the easel by the window was large, larger than anything he'd made in years. He'd stretched it himself 2 weekends ago, a Saturday morning with the radio on and the autumn light coming through the glass, and he'd stood back and looked at the blank surface for a long time before he'd been ready. He was ready now. He touched the brush to the canvas. Outside, the city moved in its usual way. The streetcar passed on Bathurst. Someone's music came through the wall from the apartment next door. The radiator clicked. The light in the room was good. It was very good. It was the kind of light that tells you the day is going to be worth something if you pay attention to it. Vincent Okafor paid attention to everything. He always had.